And we're back. Hey everyone, welcome back. This is the Sixpence Productions YouTube channel. I am owner, executive producer, founder, head fool of Sixpence Productions, Nick Langan. And it's been a little while since I made a video. We were doing a series of videos on our main focus, our current project, In the Shadow Fireplaces, which is a supernatural thriller, pro-life supernatural thriller, with some pretty great actors attached, assembling a great crew. And I've done a few videos on that, the foundation of the company, the book and how that came to be, Unborn, which In the Shadow Fireplaces is based on, and then some of the challenges of adapting a book into a TV or movie medium. You can find those on our channel, and I will link them below. I'll also link the book Unborn below. But after a freak illness and a few other personal things, I'm back, and I actually wanted to talk about something a little bit different this week, today, whenever this video you're seeing it. I've been focusing mainly on specifics to our project, just as a sort of bonus for anybody that was interested in what we're doing, and I think it's important to document our process, because what we found trying to make this stuff is that a lot of this film and TV stuff is shrouded in mystery, and it takes forever, and look at you have to work some kind of crazy deal or voodoo. I wanted to document it to prove basically that's not exactly the case. With hard work, you can get some of this stuff done. Some of it's challenging, for sure, and if you're working with a controversial subject, perhaps, some of it's going to be more challenging, but still totally feasible. And I think one of the great things about the modern era is that most people with some creative talent now have access to the ability to make films, TV, whatever, right? I'm filming this video on my iPhone, which has a camera that's however many times better than what they filmed the Lord of the Rings movies on. Obviously, there's a whole bunch of more details to that, but the point is the technology is available for us to make stuff, whoever wants to. So I've been talking about the specifics of In the Shadow Fireplaces, but today I wanted to just address something else that bugs me. It's been bugging me for a long time, and that is the problem with most conservative and Christian films. I think in the first video where I talked about the company, I made it clear that I don't consider us a Christian company. And what I mean is, when you hear Christian film now, you have a specific connotation that your brain fills in with that, because most of the Christian film industry has been made up of this sort of Protestant evangelical style of family-friendly, pure flicks. You guys probably know what I'm talking about. Just to be clear, if that is your thing, not going to rag on you too much. Similarly, I said that we weren't exactly a conservative company, because we're seeing the rise now of some very blatantly conservative entertainment. If you follow us on Instagram, I put up a little video of the New Norm show, which was released, I think, on X, and it was terrible. There's more and more stuff like that being made now, which is good in some ways. Conservatives are trying to enter the culture and take it back. But I reject these labels for us because they come with all this baggage, right? So I am a Christian. I am a conservative guy. I do have conservative values. And so obviously anything that I make is going to reflect a lot of those things. My worldview is completely shaped by faith and by those core beliefs. However, the problem that I'm seeing and I want to address is that the conservative and the Christian film and TV space sucks. Now, you might ask yourself, how could that be? Obviously, the values that should unite those things together, those are common core values that we all hold. So how can you make a show that, or a movie that upholds those values but is not good? And I think I've come up with a diplomatic answer to that. So that's what this video is. No idea how long it'll be. I always think my videos are going to be short, but then I kind of ramble on a little bit. I like to talk about this stuff. What can I say? Let's deal with what's the problem with modern entertainment as a whole. We'll say Hollywood and all that stuff right now. I think most of us would agree. The problem is they bash us over the head with a message. The message, if you will. They put this message, these modern standards, into everything. They are not concerned with telling a good story so much as they are concerned with telling a story that checks all the appropriate boxes, that follows the DEI requirements, that allows representation. This is how you end up with shows that are supposed to be set in the 14th century in medieval England, and yet we have a racially diverse cast that has lots of women running around sword fighting, lots of different minority races that were not present at the time, because it's so important to have representation. And then, of course, oftentimes they will not only put these people in, but they'll also insert modern values onto these historical characters. As an example, I'm using history because it's the easiest, I think, to understand what the problem is. And so you end up with this show about, women's rights and women knights, ethnically diverse women knights in medieval England, which, hey, maybe I should write it. But it doesn't work. The people that are hired to write this stuff are not very good because they're relying on all these identity politics and all this nonsense. So that's the first thing. You just have a low quality, because some of this stuff, like it or not, you could approach in a way that is still good and quality and enjoyable, even if we disagree with the overall premise. I'll give you an example. Several years ago, when I started writing full-time, I started trying to up my reading, because obviously if you don't read a lot, you're not going to be a good writer. It's a lot of intake. You want to know what else is going on. How does this person do this? How does this person do this, right? And I read this book, and I actually ended up reading the second one. The first book, I believe, is called The Rage of Dragons. It is a fantasy novel. It is a really well done, in my view, fantasy novel. Very well written, very engaging, and it takes sort of medieval fantasy and blends it with African fantasy and culture in a way that's very unique and I haven't seen done before. And a big part of the book is the idea of class structure, of overcoming class structure. And I don't know if the author has ever come out and said explicitly in interviews that he's trying to reflect what he believes are current issues in the modern United States of America, or the modern free world, with different racial minorities or whatever. I don't know that he's ever said that. However, you could definitely interpret the writing to be a critique on some of that. And yet the books are really good and engaging, and they do it well. They weave it in. The story's engaging. There are elements like that, the class structure, that could be taken as a critique on modern society, but you don't have to necessarily do that. It doesn't beat you over the head with it. It doesn't accuse you of being a terrible person if you disagree. You can still just read it and say, yeah, well, that's the way this is right now in this world, and no, I don't think that that's exactly how America is, as an example. That is the appropriate way to weave in potential politics or ideas or what have you into a novel like that. I'll give you another example. George R. R. Martin, who wrote Game of Thrones, and he hasn't finished it and probably never will, but wrote Game of Thrones, has often said that the White Walkers, the zombie apocalypse that's marching towards civilization, is his analogy for climate change. I think that analogy is stupid. I don't read those books and see that, really. But that's the author saying that's what he meant. But it's so subtle, and it doesn't have to be taken the way that it doesn't matter. So I think you're getting my point. A lot of these things, you can weave in things, even that people disagree with. But if you do it well, you do it subtly, it doesn't have to be a make or break. That's the way that you write something like that and put it in there. Story has to come first when you're trying to create any sort of narrative art. Okay? It has to. If it doesn't, what happens is if the message comes first, the story doesn't reflect truth, if that makes sense. The story has to reflect truth, because that's why we watch things and get engaged with it, is there's an element of truth that we connect with. All right? So this is why you can have a fantasy story that's totally crazy in this other world, but if the characters feel true, they feel like real people to us, we can identify with them, even if they look nothing like us, even if they don't act like us. We can find elements of them that we enjoy. This is getting into my first joke that I made about the diverse medieval show, right? That's another element, a layering on a falsehood. So let's say you have a poor story that's all about something that just wasn't present in the medieval world, and you have these female knights, which, you know, they're the best female knights. They're the best knights of all time. They beat everyone all the time, and we're acting like this is how things were. And then you add on to it, you've got a racially diverse cast in 14th century England with, equal representation for white people and black people and Latinos and Asians and whatever else. And so your main character in this historical drama is a half black, half Asian woman knight who is going to thrust the patriarchy from its seat in medieval England. Okay, all of these elements combine to just make something that's false. It's not true. And if it's not true, there's a limit to how good it can be anyway. But then you add on the fact that most of the time these things aren't good, and you just get the modern crap that we're getting from Hollywood. All right? This is a way to think about it that's a little bit different than a lot of modern critics of this kind of stuff articulate. But I've been thinking about it. It's a lack of fundamental truth that is a problem. So that is why a majority of this stuff in Hollywood and TV and whatever, lately, it just feels stale. They're beating you over the head with a message that you may or may not agree with. They're setting up a premise for a story that you inherently know is not correct, is not true. And then they're poorly written and whatever else. Get yourself some 7 Weeks coffee from the link down below. My favorite is the Hope blend, but there are a bunch of blends. 7 Weeks Coffee is a pro-life coffee company supporting a variety of pregnancy centers and pro-life causes with money from every purchase. So now you get into the problem of the conservative or the Christian, and I'm going to lump them kind of together. I'll start with the Christian films. They do the same thing. There is a fundamental lack of truth in most Christian films, at least most mainstream ones. Now, that doesn't mean it's all not true. Obviously, the gospel message is true, I believe. But let's say that you have your Christian thriller movie where, actually, this has been done. There's a movie called Beckman with David A.R. White. And in it, they marketed it as sort of the Christian John Wick. And I was intrigued because I was like, there's no way this could work. And I watched it. And in the movie, David A.R. White plays a hitman, Beckman, who comes to faith and retires and becomes I think he becomes a pastor of a small church or something. Yeah. And then there's a girl that he takes in, and she's kidnapped by this cult. And so Beckman has to come out of retirement and track her down or whatever, right? You could 100% make that idea awesome. 100%. You could do something really cool with it. Really weird and off. And the idea of a character giving up a violent past and coming to some sort of faith and then having to come out of retirement from that violent past and trying to approach it now in a new way. That's a time-honored story. But the movie lacks fundamental truth. When your premise is all these hitmen tracking each other down and this crazy cult, but you keep a lot of the action PG, because you still want to appeal to the family-friendly crowd. It feels like it has no weight. When your bad guys, who are these evil assassins kidnapping girls for cults, won't say any swear words that would garner a serious PG-13 rating, we start to see it doesn't feel true. The message, the story we might agree with. Okay, it's about redemption, it's about faith, it's about changing your past, about God using your past for your future to help people in ways that only you can. These are all elements that are true, but the world that most of these Christian movies create are not true, because what they do is they apply the standards of what these people making the movie think the world should be, most of this being sort of evangelical Christians. And so evangelical Christians are totally opposed to swearing, and so when we make our action thriller, none of the bad guys are going to say anything worse than damn, right? But that's not how the bad guys in your film aren't evangelical Christians. They wouldn't follow those rules. And so you end up with these really neutered projects, even some of which come from really good ideas, where because you have applied your worldview to everything, I then, as a viewer, watch it and I say, this just feels cheesy and fake because this is not how people behave. Father Stu was a movie that came out a couple years ago with Mark Wahlberg, where it's about a guy that starts off as a professional boxer, or an amateur boxer rather, and then he tries to become an actor, and eventually he becomes a priest, but he has this degenerative condition, and it's a really good movie. And the first part of that movie is just full of profanity and him trying to do things. They don't show everything gratuitously. There's no gratuitous sex scenes or smut or anything like that. But you really get the sense that this guy transforms from one thing into another thing by the time he's a priest through his suffering. Machine Gun Preacher with Gerard Butler. That's another one that comes to mind, where he was a gang banger and a biker, and he's not a good guy. And the movie starts with him getting out of prison, and I think his wife is converted. And so gradually, the first part of the movie, she just sort of loves him, and he eventually wears him down. He comes to church, and he has a turnaround, and then he goes over to Africa, and he's trying to help rescue these child soldiers and stuff. Without the first part of the movie being kind of uncomfortable to watch, I mean, he almost kills a guy, I think. Like, he almost murders this junkie or something. His transformation means nothing. And so with Christian movies in particular, I think we're afraid to tell the truth about how people are. We don't have to glorify it, but we're afraid to tell the truth. And then the movies just end up feeling stale and fake, just like a movie that preaches a sort of leftist ideology. It is the exact same problem. The PureFlix Samson movie springs to mind. There are many interpretations, I suppose, of the Samson story, but he's not a good guy. He is the kind of person that is arrogant, he's hedonistic, he's selfish, he does nothing that the Lord tells him, and yet in the Bible story, the Lord uses him regardless to bring about the destruction of his enemies, even at his own personal cost. Even his last prayer before he pushes the pillars down, spoiler alert if you haven't read the story of Samson, is that the Lord will give him the strength to take vengeance upon his enemies. This is not a heroic guy. The Samson movie does everything they can to make him a heroic, kind of bumbling but good-hearted guy, because we're afraid of the truth. We should not be afraid of the truth if we're Christian filmmakers. We have the monopoly on truth, I would argue. But it undermines our very goals, our very premise, if we can't honestly look at how the world is. And it also softens the gospel message. What do you need the gospel for? What do you need a relationship with Christ for? If the worst that's going to happen if you're a Satanist biker is, you're going to give somebody some dirty looks as a bad guy in this movie and, sort of chastise him and give him a couple punches or whatever. But, you're not that bad anyway, even as the villain. So then what need is there for redemption? It's a problem of truth. And I think until it's solved, and we're starting to see some solving of it, until it's solved, Christian movies are going to continue to suck. This is why I think some of the best movies that have Christian ethics are not viewed as Christian movies. They're not in the Christian film industry. The Scorsese film Silence is a phenomenal movie about missionaries, Jesuit missionaries in Japan in the 1600s. Brutal, uncompromising, and uncomfortable to watch. I don't even agree with all of the premises, or not premises. I don't even agree with all of the things that the film sort of indicates it believes exactly. Like, I don't agree, I don't think. And yet the film was deeply moving and thought-provoking and actually explored some of these Christian ideas with honesty that is rare to see. Just a quick note on the conservative film making. I mentioned The New Norm. The Daily Wire has been making stuff for a while that's been kind of hit or miss. We've seen a few other things. Look, here's the secret to making successful movies that have conservative values. Conservative values, at least at this juncture, how I would define them, are what were traditional American values, okay? Love of country, faith, family, doing things the right way, hard work, standing on principles, all right? These are things that are classic and timeless. Again, truth. You don't need to make something like The New Norm that just calls out every single current woke problem in a way that's not even funny and draws attention to it. Look how funny this is. Look at how ridiculous this is. Yeah, we all know. Something like Top Gun Maverick is a conservative film. Would they bill themselves as that? Probably not. But it's just a classic Hollywood film. You've got an aging hero. He is a hero. America's good. And he's going for one last adventure, right? You don't need to beat people over the head. Once again, weave your ideas and your ideology into the story if you want to, but tell a good story. We all know the truth of certain things. You don't need to beat people over the head with it. Mr. Bertram on the Daily Wire is another example. I watched the first episode and I thought, this is not funny because this isn't how people are. Yes, a lot of this woke stuff is going on, but not in this way. And just pointing it out is not a joke. Just pointing it out is not funny in and of itself most of the time. We need to get back to the idea that we do have the monopoly on truth. Conservative values are better than crazy leftist values. The idea that you should work hard and improve your life for your family is a good idea. The idea that you should have some fondness for this country that allows you to do that is a good idea. The Bible talks about your faith and a relationship with God and things like that being a light in the darkness. Christ is a light in the darkness. I think the problem is that Christian filmmakers want to make everything light so that they can have this PG movie, but then Christ's light doesn't necessarily shine as brightly in contrast to that, if that makes sense. You're lightening everything and you're weakening the appeal and the need and the effect of this stuff. This is one of the reasons I'm kind of opposed to kidifying certain Bible stories. I love the story of King David. When I read the life of King David, it's like a Conan the Barbarian novel. There's action, there's intrigue, there's sin, there's falling, but then there's redemption, there's war. If you have to neuter that to tell the story to a child, then maybe you're losing core elements of the story anyway, and maybe the child just has to get a little bit older before they can read or understand that story, instead of softening it and watering it down. We should not be watering down the truth, and I think we should stop giving up our claims on the truth in order to try and make nice and safe entertainment that everybody will like and appreciate.